Dr. King, great to have you back. I'm glad my colleague, Mr. Barletta, mentioned the importance of extended learning opportunities. I wish he would have told us how the marshmallow pizza tasted, though. So, I'm glad this committee is continuing its work to make sure that the implementation of Every Student Succeeds Act delivers on the goal of Congress of providing state and local education agencies with the flexibility and the resources that they need to meet those unique needs of their communities, while also advancing equitable opportunities and outcomes for America's students, especially those who have been historically underserved. And it bears repeating that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is really a civil rights law. Its core purpose is to help level the playing field and provide those resources and opportunities where they're lacking and require action to help close the gaps. And the rigidity of No Child Left Behind, I appreciate the chairman's comments, his list of problems that we're well aware of, in many ways worked against this purpose, and I'm confident that the Every Student Succeeds Act will uphold the civil rights legacy of the original ESSA and be responsive to the needs of students in each community. I want to thank you, Dr. King, for mentioning the power of the arts to engage students. I have 2 nationally recognized STEAM schools in the district I'm honored to represent, and if you want to see engaged students, visit a STEAM school. So I want to follow up a little bit on Representative Wilson's questions. One of the most frequently criticized pieces of No Child Left Behind that I've heard about over the years is the high-stakes testing. Fortunately, ESSA takes a number of steps to reduce the punitive measures. We know that teachers need to assess students. We need to start looking at assessments as a positive tool to help inform instruction. The department's testing plan is aligned with the bipartisan legislation I sponsored to lead to the provisions in ESSA to reduce the duplicative and low-quality assessments. I'm pleased that the president's budget prioritizes funding for auditing those assessment systems. So can you briefly follow up a little bit on Representative Wilson's question as well and talk about how the funding from these state assessment grants can be used to develop streamlined assessment systems that support teaching and learning?
Yeah, you know, we've seen good progress on this across states. You know, one of the things that states have begun to do is to ask if students are in 8th grade and they're taking an advanced math class, they're taking an algebra class, do they really need to also take the 8th grade math exam as well as the algebra exam? And we've worked with states so that students are only taking the one exam. It's been an opportunity to reduce assessments. We know that there are states that have gathered educators together across the state to look at both the state assessments and the local assessments. I think one of the challenges, and you know this well, one of the challenges is that districts responding to the narrow accountability system of No Child Left Behind have added many interim assessments over the course of the year, some of which may be useful to inform instruction, some of which are actually a redundant exercise in mimicking the state tests. And I think we've seen states and districts take meaningful steps to get rid of those, in some cases replace low-level tests with a research project in social studies or with a science experiment and a lab report on that science experiment in place of a bubble test. And so we're seeing progress on this. I think the additional resources
I'm going to get to another question. Thank you, Dr. King. Certainly removing the high stakes and changing that aspect will matter. During our subcommittee hearing on February 10th, the Oklahoma State Superintendent discussed her concern that their state's current accountability system masks the performance of the state's subgroup population. So how does ESSA raise the floor for equity and address that concern?
Yeah, it's critical that ESSA requires that information be provided on the performance of all subgroups. And I think Joy from Oklahoma spoke to the ways in which that will enhance equity in her state, that she wants to make sure that schools are paying attention to each of the subgroups. And that is one of the areas where some states will need to make adjustments to their existing accountability systems, and I think state chiefs are eager to do that.
Thank you. And I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question. I appreciate the department's commitment to hearing from stakeholders so far to date. Can you talk about how the department will continue to involve and be responsive to diverse education stakeholders?
Yeah. So we continue to meet with stakeholders across the department, senior staff. I've been doing meetings myself with civil rights leaders across the country. We're going to continue to make sure we engage educators. whether we're doing the rulemaking process, negotiated rulemaking process obviously has a particular structure, and then when there's a rule that we will gather public comment on that. But we see this as an ongoing conversation with stakeholders, and think that's one of the strengths of the Every Student Succeeds Act, is that it really requires, at every level, at the federal level and at the state level, meaningful engagement with educators, with parents, with community leaders, with civil rights leaders.
Thank you. I see
Young
my
lady's
time has
time
expired.
has
Thank you, Mr.
expired. Mr. Wakita.